Courtney talked about the wide bodies in Seattle. They're going to move some of the A330s to do long haul out of Seattle to Tokyo and Seoul, but they're also going to do stuff from Seattle to Anchorage in the summer season. And just what you can do with that combined network, that combined fleet, and grow the scale over time. It gives them tremendous, I think, market presence and force on the West Coast and in the markets, and really makes them very competitive. And I think even adds an additional layer of competitiveness to Oneworld in the North American market. Hawaiian equally is great management team, great brand, and I think Alaska was very cognizant and respectful in that, and part of that acquisition process and in maintaining that. So it'd be really interesting to see what Ben and the team do. I think there was a slide in the investor day which showed Alaska's ASMs, like the percentage of their ASMs over time, and it was I forget the exact amount, but it was something like 60-70% were going Seattle east, right? And when you layer in Hawaiian, it ends up being more like 40% east, 40% west, and then the rest up and down the West Coast. So from a network diversification perspective, it also helps build on that quite a bit. And look, they've got a really, really good team at Alaska, and very smart. And I think they've been very focused and thoughtful about what they're going to do. I think the timing from the DOJ and DOT in terms of that coming across, it happened very fast. As Courtney said, there were a lot of people waiting for that. And it definitely probably wasn't a given the JetBlue and Spirit, but they got it done.
I wasn't ever really nervous that it wouldn't pass, but maybe I was naive. How much do you think the rhetoric and the fear that it wouldn't go through because of the JetBlue Spirit not going through, how much of that was a ghosting or effect or a halo effect, of that? There was just so many fundamental differences between the mergers, right? Network overlap and that. I just never thought that Alaska Hawaiian was in jeopardy ever. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's talk about the one major difference between the Spirit JetBlue merger and the Alaska Hawaiian merger that we haven't mentioned yet, and that's just the judge, or lack of one, or DOJ on the Alaska Hawaiian side. This was the great unknown, and I don't guess you could call it a halo effect. It was just more risk, right? The Spirit JetBlue merger, which, by the way, the industry had fundamentally changed during the period while it was still being challenged. But the finding, the response of the judge, the actual paper, for lack of actual vocabulary, late on a Friday, that he wrote, and that ended kind of with, this one's for you, Spirit customers. People were like, oh, so we can get a nut job, as like we have to bake that into our probability for mergers and this and that. I think that, call it the halo effect, definitely hung over Alaska Hawaiian until that deadline passed. And I think it was so anticlimactic. It was like, oh, what's going to happen? Like, we were counting the hours, and then did nothing. It's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, look, under the current administration, just generally, I don't think M&A was necessarily favored. And so there was always that broader overhang. To your point, Peter, it was different competitive market, different region, the overlap or lack thereof was a lot different. So, whether or not it's a given or not, I can't speak to that, but I think that just from a sentiment perspective, there were questions about whether it would proceed. I also think that just from a broader industry perspective and timing, the DOJ became more focused on antitrust issues with Google right around that time as well, and so that might have played into some of the overlapping element between Alaska and Hawaiian.
So as a result of the merger now and the the really focused effort on Seattle, how much should Delta be worried?
Worried? I mean, yeah, look, Delta is not to Alaska what Alaska is to Delta. Like those two things don't work. Can you tell I'm helping my daughter prepare for her SATs? The Delta's not worried. Seattle's not been profitable for Delta. There's very little sign that this isn't going to make that suddenly profitable for Delta. The interesting players in this whole this merger aren't Alaska's competitors, in my opinion. It's Alaska's partners. If you remember, Alaska partners with everybody, right? And in large part because everybody were like, "Oh, they're a narrow body operator." I mean, why not? Like, I'll take the feed into the U.S. and be their long haul provider, and then they're like, "Yoink, we've got 787s and A330s, and we're gonna fly them to Tokyo and where was the other one? Seoul, right? So American basically started long haul operations because of Alaska's addition to One World. Now, granted, a lot of that was for Americans' ability to get to Bangalore, which requires there's this technicality where it requires you to fly over this really small country called Russia, and that became a problem there. So they never really able to do it. But it's the partners of Alaska that seem to be more of an interesting story in terms of, were they surprised? How do they feel about this transition? No fallout, no complaints or anything yet. But I think more from a competitive aspect, that seems a little more interesting than Delta. It's not. I mean, it's rounding error for Delta, and it's important to Delta, but it's still it's rounding error.
So there's in the investor day and that there are a lot of discussions right around the Hawaiian fleet and the Alaska Airlines fleet. Not a lot of discussion of the other Alaska Air Group airline, which is Horizon, and how that's going to be leveraged, and if it'll grow. They've been flying some Alaska routes now out of Anchorage and Fairbanks and that. What do you guys think about Horizon as a Air Group member?
Yeah,
Brian,
I
go
think,
ahead.
yeah, I'll start. And Courtney, obviously, the regional space even better than me, and those guys, especially